He was a warrior, a monk, the Grand Master of the most powerful military order in Christendom. And on this day, after 7 long years of imprisonment and brutal torture, he was about to die. But Jacques de Molay would not go silently into the flames. As the fire began to lick at his feet, eyewitnesses reported that his voice boomed across the River Seine, not with a plea for mercy, but with a curse. He summoned his accusers, Pope Clement V and King Philip IV of France, to meet him before the judgment of God within the year. Both men were dead within 10 months. The story of the end begins 7 years earlier. The date would become a legend in its own right. Friday, October 13th, 1307. At dawn, on the explicit orders of King Philip IV, royal agents moved in unison. In a meticulously planned, kingdom-wide military operation, they kicked in the doors of every Templar house in France. This was not a slow, methodical church investigation. It was a lightning raid, a police action, executed with ruthless precision by the state. The scale was breathtaking. From the most powerful knight to the humblest brother, every Templar in the kingdom was arrested. They were caught completely by surprise, their power and prestige rendered meaningless in a single morning. The question was, why? The answer, when it came, was designed to shock and horrify all of Christendom. The Templars were not charged with treason or rebellion. They were accused of something far worse, a crime against God himself, heresy. The royal indictment was a masterwork of propaganda, a list of 127 charges, each more lurid than the last. They were accused of spitting on the cross, of engaging in homosexual acts as part of their secret rituals, of financial fraud. But the centerpiece of the prosecution, the charge designed to capture the public imagination, was the claim that the Templars secretly worshipped a demonic idol, a grotesque severed head they called Baphomet. This was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. The name Baphomet was almost certainly an old French corruption of the name Mohammed. In an era when Christians wrongly believed Muslims were idolaters who worshipped their prophet, this accusation was explosive. It transformed the Templars, the holy warriors of Christ, into the ultimate traitors, men who had secretly adopted the faith of the very enemy they were created to fight. The accusers had no actual evidence of this idol. The descriptions extracted from the knights would vary wildly because the Baphomet was not a real object of worship. It was a bogeyman. But how could Philip prove such outrageous claims? He didn't need to find evidence. He manufactured it. The king's men, not church inquisitors, took charge of the interrogations. Their methods were brutal and effective. Knights were starved, stretched on the rack, their feet slowly burned. The goal, as one contemporary noted, was to inflict maximum distress without death. Under this unbearable agony, many broke. Dozens of knights, including the Grand Master Jacques de Molay himself, confessed to whatever their torturers demanded. Philip was hijacking a known legal process for his own ends. Heresy was the perfect crime. A conviction automatically meant the confiscation of all property by the state, and the rules of the Inquisition allowed for torture to extract the truth. He had used this exact playbook before, leveling nearly identical charges against his enemies, from Pope Boniface VIII to the Lombard bankers. It was a template for political and financial destruction. But the strongest evidence of this fraud comes from the knights themselves. When the torture stopped, many found their courage. Dozens revoked their forced confessions, proclaiming the innocence of their order, knowing full well what it would cost them. For a relapsed heretic, there was no mercy, only the stake. But to understand why a king would go to such lengths, we have to look past the lies, past the smoke and fire of the pyres, and follow the one thing that truly mattered: the money. To uncover the real story, we have to pivot away from the sensational charges of heresy and look at what the Knights Templar had actually become by the dawn of the 14th century. They were no longer just warrior monks. They were Europe's most powerful and trusted financial institution. When the order was founded around 1118, its mission was simple: protect Christian pilgrims on the dangerous roads to Jerusalem. Its official name was the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Members took strict vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But here lies the great paradox of the Templars. Their vow of individual poverty was the secret to their immense organizational wealth. Knights who joined the order had to renounce all their personal property, donating their lands, their castles, and their fortunes to the Templars. Since they were celibate, there were no heirs to dilute this wealth. It was a system of perpetual compounding asset accumulation. Donations poured in, from kings leaving them entire thirds of their kingdoms to commoners bequeathing small plots of land in their wills. This river of wealth was supercharged by a papal bull in 1139, which granted the Templars extraordinary privileges. They were exempt from all local taxes, could collect their own church tithes, and answered only to the Pope himself. With this vast infrastructure and unparalleled level of trust, the Templars pioneered a financial system that was centuries ahead of its time. Their greatest innovation was the letter of credit, introduced around 1150. It was a simple, brilliant idea that eliminated the immense risk of carrying cash across a continent rife with bandits. But their services didn't stop there. To call them a bank is almost too simple. They were a medieval financial services conglomerate. They stored valuables and legal documents in their fortified preceptories, which were trusted more than royal vaults. They acted as executors for the estates of nobles, ensuring their last wishes were carried out. Their reputation for integrity was such that kings and bishops hired them to audit their own government accounts. They were entrusted to collect taxes for both popes and kings, like the famous Saladin tithe in England. They brokered massive deals like King Henry III of England's purchase of the island of Oleron. And, of course, they provided loans. The Church officially forbade charging interest or usury, but the Templars found clever loopholes, billing for administrative fees, or manipulating currency exchange rates to turn a profit. They were the trusted financial backbone of Europe, a vertically integrated corporation with an international footprint, its own army for security, and the Pope as its CEO. And their biggest client? The Kingdom of France. The Templar headquarters in Paris, a massive 50-meter-tall fortress within the city, was so secure that for many years it served as the de facto royal treasury. European monarchs, including a long line of French kings, relied on the Templars for financing. When King Louis VII needed a massive loan for the Second Crusade, he went to the Templars. When King John of England needed a secure vault for the crown jewels, he deposited them at the London Temple. King Philip IV was no different. He inherited a sizable war debt to the order from his father, and while that was paid off, his own constant wars and lavish spending plunged the crown back into a deep financial crisis. He became one of the Templars' single largest debtors. The King of France owed a fortune to the very organization that housed his treasury. He was, in effect, a tenant in his own bank, and the rent was coming due. To understand Philip's motive, you have to understand the sheer scale of his desperation. His reign was defined by constant cash-hemorrhaging wars against England and Flanders. His government ran on chronic deficits. To fund his ambitions, Philip resorted to increasingly predatory measures. He repeatedly devalued the currency, secretly reducing the silver content of coins, earning him the nickname the Counterfeiter King among his own people. But this was a short-term fix that caused riots and inflation. He needed lump sums of cash, and he knew where to get them. His actions reveal a clear pattern, a ruthless financial strategy. In 1291, he arrested the Lombard bankers and seized their assets. In 1306, he did the same to the Jewish communities of France, expelling them and declaring their loans forfeit to the crown. The attack on the Templars was not an isolated act of piety. It was the final and most audacious step in a series of state-sponsored seizures. They were simply the richest target left. But Philip's problem wasn't just financial, it was political. And the key to understanding this lies in an event that happened 16 years earlier, far from Paris in the last Christian stronghold in the Holy Land. The fall of Acre in 1291 marked the definitive end of the Crusades in the Levant. For the Knights Templar, it was an existential catastrophe. Their entire reason for being, to defend the Holy Land, was gone. They retreated to Europe, but they were now a private army with no war to fight, a powerful military machine sitting idle. This created an intolerable situation for a king like Philip IV. He was obsessed with creating a modern, centralized French state, with himself as the absolute monarch. Yet here was a massive, wealthy organization operating within his borders, with its own army, its own lands, and its own laws, whose ultimate loyalty was not to him, but to the Pope in Rome. This was made worse by Philip's bitter power struggle with the papacy itself. He had previously tried to tax the French clergy, leading to a furious conflict with Pope Boniface VIII, whom Philip's agents had eventually arrested and humiliated. Before 1291, the Templars' power was justified by their holy mission. After 1291, from Philip's perspective, they were no longer an asset to Christendom. They were a threat to France. The board was set. Philip was broke and facing a political rival he could not control. The Templars were rich, powerful, and politically vulnerable. In their destruction, the king and his wily minister, Guillaume de Nogret, saw a single, brutal solution to all of their problems. Erase the debt, seize the assets, eliminate a rival power base, all at once. All that was needed was a justification so heinous, so morally repugnant, that no one would dare defend the victims. The charge of heresy was the perfect weapon. Some historians even suggest a personal motive, that Philip, the self-proclaimed most Christian king, had once been rejected for lay membership in the prestigious order, a slight he never forgot. This was never about God. It was about debt. The charges of heresy, the lurid tales of devil worship, they were a smokescreen, a legal pretext for the largest, most ruthless act of sovereign debt default in medieval history. Philip IV wasn't purging heretics. He was nationalizing a bank, erasing his debts, and eliminating a political rival in one fell swoop. It was a state-sponsored corporate takeover 700 years ahead of its time. After 7 years rotting in prison, the final act played out on March 18, 1314. The surviving leaders of the Templars were led onto a scaffold erected in the square before Notre Dame Cathedral. They were there to hear their sentence, life in prison, and publicly reaffirm the confessions that had been tortured out of them. 2 of the knights mumbled their guilt, but then, to the astonishment of the crowd and the dismay of the cardinals, Jacques de Molay stepped forward. He was not there to beg, he was there to set the record straight. He proclaimed that his only crime was betraying his own order by confessing to lies to save his own life under torture. He declared the Knights Templar to be pure and holy and renounced his confession completely. Inspired by his courage, Geoffroy de Charnay did the same. In the eyes of the law, this was the ultimate sin. They were relapsed heretics. No further trial was needed. A furious King Philip gave the order. They were to be burned at the stake. That very day. As the sun set over Paris, de Molay and de Charnay were taken to a small island in the Seine. The pyre was ready. Eyewitnesses said de Molay faced his agonizing death with a composure that stunned the crowd, cementing his reputation as a martyr. And it was from these flames that he unleashed his final, terrible prophecy. Whether it was a curse, a prophecy, or a grim coincidence, history records what happened next. Pope Clement V was dead within 33 days. King Philip was dead within the year. But the curse, as legend tells it, was not finished. De Molay had supposedly condemned Philip's entire bloodline. Over the next 14 years, all three of Philip's sons reigned and died. The 300-year-old house of Capet came to an abrupt end. They would forever be known in French history as les rois maudits, the accursed kings. For 7 centuries, the official story, Philip's story, held. The Knights Templar were heretics, justly destroyed. But in 2001, a discovery in the Vatican's secret archives changed everything. The historian Barbara Frail uncovered a document that had been lost for centuries, the Chinon Parchment. It was the official notarized record of the Pope's own investigation into the Templar leadership conducted at the Castle of Chinon in August 1308, a year after the arrests. The parchment is a bombshell. It proves that Pope Clement V, after hearing their testimony, formally absolved Jacques de Molay and the other Templar leaders of the charge of heresy. He restored them to the Church. The Pope's original plan was not to destroy the order, but to reform it. But King Philip would not be denied his prize. He threatened the Pope with military action, forcing Clement to capitulate. In 1312, the Pope officially dissolved the order, not because they were guilty of heresy, which his own investigation had disproven, but, as the papal decree states, because of the scandalous accusations and to avoid further conflict. The Pope knew they were innocent, but he was too weak to save them. For 7 centuries, the story was of heretic knights who betrayed their faith. But the truth, hidden in a dusty archive, was far simpler and far more brutal. The Knights Templar were not destroyed for their sins. They were destroyed for their wealth. They were the victims of a king who needed their money and a pope who was too weak to protect them. It remains one of history's greatest and most successful heists. A lie that held for 700 years until now.